and welcome in to a historic episode of Heat of the Moment. My name is Micah. I'm joined by my fellow host and friend Lino. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a trade to announce. The
Oh my
Miami
gosh.
Heat have traded Jimmy Butler after 3 tumultuous months. We are finally done with the Jimmy Butler trade saga. He is going to the Golden State Warriors. They are paying him handsomely. He is getting a 2-year, $120 million extension. He got his max. He got what he wanted. The Heat are getting back Andrew Wiggins, top 10 protected first round pick in 2025. PJ Tucker and probably Kyle Anderson. The deal's not totally finalized yet. But Lino, there's so much to get into, but initial reactions, what was going through your head when you saw this notification?
Just a giant sigh of relief. Emotionally, there's a lot of mixed emotions here regarding a guy that did so much for us over these past 4 or 5 years. And the impact he immediately had on this team will never be forgotten. But what will also not be forgotten is the absolute dismal situation we've been in the past few months and even the greater half of this season that we've experienced so far. I just am happy to move on. More than anything, I don't think we really knocked it out of the park all things considered. I am not happy to see Jimmy gone, but I am excited to move past this. And yeah, I was very impressed with Pat Riley's ability to execute a trade that left me at least relatively satisfied and overall so excited for what the rest of the season is going to look like. I don't think this is a lost season by any means. I think the pieces we got back are going to be incredibly helpful for us, especially around the performances of our main guys right now. And yeah, I'm just excited to focus on Heat basketball again. What are you feeling? How did you react to this trade happening? And where were you in that moment?
Yeah, I almost felt my stress ulcers just disappear in that moment. I have not been sleeping the past couple days. I've been
Same.
so we talked about on the podcast the Luca transaction scared me because I'm like, oh, so my phone won't wake me up when this happens. So now probably every 2 hours while I'm sleeping, I wake up out of my sleep, check my notifications. So, there were rumors swirling last night that there's a potential 3-team deal where Durant goes to Golden State, Jimmy goes to Phoenix, and it sounds like the package we ultimately ended up getting from Golden State would go to Miami. Then there are rumors today. Early on, Mark Stein was saying there's a chance Jimmy stays with Miami through the deadline, and I just was so worried. That was obviously, other than getting Beal, was like the worst possible outcome. And not to hate Jimmy or anything, but just because both sides so clearly needed to move on.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then Brian Windhorst is like, well, Durant could just go to Miami. And so, of course, then all the Photoshops pour in. The fan base is like, yes, we're going to blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, the realistic option, which both of us deserve credit. We predicted Golden State last week, and it looked shaky for a little bit, but they were willing to give up that extension. So I think it's an awesome return. I think it's a perfect transition point. The transition needed to happen. Jimmy is significantly older than Bam and Tyler. Wiggins is a lot closer to them. He's plug and play 3-and-D wing. We can get into his fit and specific lineups later. You get a draft pick, which is important. If Heat fans don't remember, as long as the Heat make the playoffs this year, they will not have their first round pick. It is owed, I believe, to Oklahoma City. So it's important that A, they do make the playoffs so we don't owe an unprotected pick in the future. And B, now you have a draft pick. It's top 10 protected, which will probably convey I don't think the Warriors will have a bottom 10 record. And Lino, you text me this, that kind of 11 to 18 range where that pick will probably land. The Heat have had a ton of success. So you get financial flexibility. Maybe we'll see how much we get depending on the Kyle Anderson part of this. It'll still be more than we would have had, obviously, but you move on. You get Jimmy to a good spot. I mean, I know it was an ugly divorce. Ultimately, both sides got what they wanted, so I hope that will allow time to heal some of these wounds. But yeah, you got a pick, got a contributing player. You get to move on and focus on Bam and Ware, Tyler, Nico, all those guys. So I think everybody should be really happy. I'm happy. I feel a lot of relief. But like you said, it is a little bittersweet now. I've
Yeah.
been mourning the loss of Jimmy, in part for a few months, but now it's really setting in. I saved a bunch of TikToks of like his highlights to like white Ferrari,
Oh
and so
my gosh.
I'm going back and watching all those, and yeah, it's truly the end of an era in the Heat basketball. To me, I think it's you couldn't argue. It's the second most successful era in the history of the franchise. After the big three, these are our only other. Well, I guess you could argue the '06 Wade. I mean, that didn't feel as much of an era, but it did lead to a
Felt more like a
championship.
moment than an era
Yeah,
there. Maybe even a lead in into, what would eventually be the big three era.
yeah.
But you're right, emotions all over the place. Jimmy, managed to really tear away at so much goodwill that he built up in my eyes, as far as just how much love I had for him as a player and everything he did, and all that still remains true. It's just been a really unfortunate few months, and so just so glad to have that in the past. But overall, I think he's going to be happy in Golden State. He's getting paid, and the guys that we have, I'm excited to see, what happens. You mentioned, the flexibility kind of being iffy based on whether or not we can move Kyle Anderson. I think the give or take there is fine for the most part. If he's a great contribution and we're getting close and that depth really helps us, I think it's worth the $8 million or something like that per year. That may get us a little bit over the apron. But if it's not working, or we're not really as competitive as we need to be to make it worthwhile being in that luxury tax, then I think it's an easy enough contract to move. But I'm excited to see how it all plays out more than anything. Andrew Wiggins is a player that I'm pretty excited about to have on the team. He's a guy that I kind of, over the past 6 years, have always wished we had. And there's not really a lot to worthwhile doing when it comes to comparing to Jimmy Butler. I don't think there's anywhere near the kind of impact that any combination of players we could bring in would really make up for what we're losing there. But as far as not having Jimmy at all and replacing a vacuum, this is pretty awesome, all things considered. For what it's worth, Andrew Wiggins is younger. He, is available for more games throughout the year. I think he's played in 70 plus games in 3 out of the past 4 years. And one of those seasons, I believe it was mostly personal stuff rather than health
Hmm.
issues. And so, yeah, we got a healthy guy who can play great defense, is a really credible, not incredible, just a very strong 3-point shooter that can really help us on both ends of the ball while not necessarily needing to be ball dominant. I think his usage rate last year and the year before has kind of floated between that 21 to 23%, which I think is the sweet spot for a third or fourth guy on this team behind Tyler and Bam. And so, yeah, I think he slots in pretty easily into what we do here. I think he's a talented guy. I think it might have been Barry who tweeted earlier today that this is the, I believe, first pick in the draft to play for the Miami Heat,
Oh
behind
yeah,
Shaq,
first overall.
LeBron, and somebody else. I can't remember who the other person is. But yeah, so that's interesting. Maybe we see a third resurgence of Andrew Wiggins, which would be really cool.
Yeah,
But yeah, overall, it's going to be a very interesting ride from here on out. It's just hard to shake the emotions of just realizing that Jimmy's not going to be here anymore. It
it
just
is
felt like,
crazy. Greg Oden was the other one for people
oh
wondering at
yeah.
home. But yeah, so Lino, I wanted to ask you. I mean, I know you and I we have each other, which I love, for accountability and also for venting, because there have definitely both been moments where we've said stuff to each other about how we feel about Jimmy that is just in the moment. We'd never say it publicly. Ultimately, it's going to be warm feelings. But from Jimmy's point of view, I think it's interesting to look at this entire process, because it's it's really a process versus results kind of situation, because
Mhm.
I think he universally, no one liked how he handled all of this. Very ugly divorce, put a lot of people in, inconvenient situations, but ultimately, he got his max. He got
Mhm.
his 2-year max extension. He got to one of the destinations he wanted to go to. It was able to get Miami a good return. I think this is literally as good as you could have hoped for,
Absolutely.
a guy who's, coming off an MCL tear last season, getting older. So does the end result change how you view how he went about this process, or change any of your feelings, I guess, towards him or this season,
No,
really?
and we talked about this a little bit when this all started, that from the beginning when we decided we weren't going to pay him a max contract, which I think is the smart thing to do, that when we did that, made that decision and also decided not to trade him, to a certain extent this was probably his only way to get paid the amount of money he's getting paid. So I understand the rationale between, making a big fuss and getting out of here as soon as possible, especially if he felt like Miami wasn't taking his desire to get traded serious enough. Are there ways that he could have done this and gotten traded and gotten paid? Yes, because Memphis Grizzlies were on the table. They would have happily, at least brought him in and seen what happens. But he wasn't super sure about getting paid there, and so he ended up moving on. There's probably a few other places that would have paid him that he doesn't want to go play for. And so
Yeah.
there were probably some stuff there, but ultimately, I think that while it is something you may have to do, that doesn't mean you get off scotch free emotionally from the people you end up throwing under the bus for it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it did definitely, make me mad at him often.
Yeah.
And I think those feelings are deserved because, I get that you're doing what you have to do, but it's at the cost of, really messing up the flow and the focus of, one of my most beloved organizations. And so,
Hmm.
this is a give and take. You're going to make people mad, but you can live with that for a couple extra hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
So that is what it is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it was probably just 48 hours ago now, Brian Windhorst reported that Jimmy's people essentially reached out to the Warriors, and I guess the Warriors said, "This is kind of what we're thinking. We'd offer you as an extension." And Jimmy was like, "Yeah, no thanks. We're not signing that. Like, don't trade for me." And we'll talk about them a little later. It's so funny how the Phoenix Suns ended up being like Jimmy's huge point of leverage throughout this whole process, and they'll benefit nothing from it. That'll actually be to their detriment in a way. But basically, for as long as we've been aware of the situation, Phoenix has been the only team willing to offer him that max. So his message to everyone was, unless you're offering this max, I will not go to you. And so 48 hours ago, Golden State, I'm assuming, offered something less than the max. Jimmy was like, no. Then they tried to get Durant. Also, shout out to Kevin Durant, because I don't know what would have happened if that worked out.
Oh man.
Hopefully, it could have been bad. So shout out to KD. KD didn't want to go to the Warriors. Warriors have to circle back to Jimmy. And because Jimmy wouldn't go to them initially on whatever that extension was going to be, because he played hardball with the Warriors the same way he's played with Miami, they relented. They went up to the max extension, and he got what he wanted. So, it's a tough position, because in some ways I disagree with how NBA contracts work in general, where they can just like
Mhm.
trade these guys like and just uproot their whole lives, and they
Yeah.
just kind of have to do it. But I get the people that also argue like, oh, they're making so much money, blah blah blah. But Jimmy used what he had at his disposal to get where he wanted to go, to get the money he wanted. It worked, and honestly, I almost just wish somehow all of this could have been kept a little more tight-lipped, like the
Yeah.
less I know the better kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, if Pat Riley and Jimmy hate each other and I have no idea, cool. Like,
Mhm.
it's so we'll see what happens.
That's the
Time.
one thing where, especially compared to when you look at the De'Aaron Fox trade and even to a weirder extent the Luka trade, like how seamless those things happened, um, and how professional it seemed they went about doing it. I don't understand why that couldn't have happened here with Jimmy. And I think the problem is the player that we're dealing with, to an extent, the organization we're dealing with, and the people around the player. Like just from
Mm-hmm.
how his manager, how online, and maybe too online his manager and his posse is. And it seems to be, while the Heat organization itself doesn't really have leaks like that, Jimmy's camp definitely does. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was very frustrating to deal with as a fan. But I do want, before we move on, I do want to, give props to the Miami Heat organization. Say what you want about Pat, say what you want about their decision not to pay him and not to trade him in the offseason. This is a good package for a disgruntled player that you don't want to pay, that has an expiring contract. Like, I don't think you really get that much better of a package last offseason, because I think
Mm-hmm.
he still tells teams the exact same thing, that, hey, I might play for you all season, but I am not going to be there next year
Mm-hmm.
unless you're paying me. And so there were not that many differences unless we traded him like 2 seasons ago, which,
Mm-hmm.
we were just coming off a finals run. It's just not happening.
Yeah.
So I think he did a good job. I think people have to understand that the Miami Heat are not just going to fold for really
Mm-hmm.
anything, and
Yeah.
they're really happy to stand their ground. And it pays off because in this circumstance, the only way you can get your leverage back is when people get desperate for the player that you want, and that only
Yeah.
happens when you get up to the deadline. Now you
Yeah.
run the risk of him still being here, but the Miami Heat were clear that we were happy to find ways to send him home for the rest of the season. So
Yeah, that was the exact angle I was going to go to next is retroactively now that we have the result looking at how the Heat handled all this. And I think you're exactly right. I was very much after everything, fell apart in the camp of, man, I wish they would have done this in the offseason. I wish they would have
mhm.
prioritized this. But you're exactly right. This deal was not out there in the offseason. This deal wasn't out here a week ago. They had to take it all the way to the deadline. Reporting from Barry Jackson and others have said they're hopeful that on the week of the deadline, teams will circle back, teams will get desperate. And listen, they threaded the needle because if the reporting is true, the only other firm offer that was ever on the table was Beal and picks. And that's a horrible offer. Like
Bad.
Bradley Beal's contract, no matter what level of player he is very tough to take on. So, I mean, they threaded the needle. If the Warriors hadn't come around, if they, just a month ago, Kerr, Draymond, Steph are like, we're good where we are. We prioritize the future of the organization. If they would have stuck with that, it would have been rough. Like we probably would have had to have kept Jimmy on the team, probably kept suspending him, would have been awkward. So they played it just right. They didn't turn him into a superstar or anything, but they made a good pivot. They got back more than they traded for Jimmy. They
Yeah.
traded Josh Richardson in a first round pick. Andrew Wiggins in a first is better than that. So I mean,
Yeah.
it was such a disgusting rocky road to get here, but
Mhm.
ultimately everybody got what they wanted, and I hope that will allow time to heal wounds. I
Yeah.
hate that the Golden State Warriors play at Miami on March 25th. We have, 6
I love it.
weeks. It's
Let's see
gonna
it.
be
It's gonna be awesome.
man. Okay, this is a fun
Andrew Wiggins
question.
50 burger coming up.
Dude, I hope Jimmy's healthy for that game. I don't
Yeah.
know if I do or not. I can't wait to see how he
Especially when he sees
plays.
Andrew Wiggins in that 22. Oh, he's gonna be sick.
Oh
Oh,
man,
man. That was
we'll see.
we'll see. I think that's the one thing is I'm appreciative that I'm a fan of an organization that's built for really ugly stuff like this. So many other organizations really would have just folded and brought in something terrible or sent out picks like just to get the player out of there or something crazy. There's so few organizations that I think I won't go so far as to say that there's not an organization that could have handled this better. I think there's been some great organizations out there that have done some really crazy things, but I'm really proud of what we were able to do given the circumstances. But I'm also kind of sad because I do believe they're probably going to let Andrew Wiggins wear that 22 just because of how fresh it is. Like the one player we could have traded for is the only one that rocks that number. And yeah, if
Yeah,
it was like months from now, it could have been fine. I don't think it's fine right now.
I'm very interested to see how that goes. I'm hoping like they already announced Jimmy's going to wear 10 for Golden State. I don't know the significance of that. I'm hoping Andrew Wiggins just wants to wear like whatever, 28 or something, like just something totally different. Because yeah, that would be tough to see that because I still want them to retire Jimmy's number. I really hope that years from now people forget all the different reports, all the offers Jimmy shot down, and also keep in mind that that Memphis package is not as good as what the Heat ultimately got. Like Marcus Smart is not as good as Andrew Wiggins, so that they did well to do that. So I really hope because of how well it worked out that both sides will be able to be somewhat amicable. Also hope the fans receive him warmly when they visit on March 25th. What's your prediction there? How do you think that'll go as far as in the arena?
I think it'll be a mix. I think there'll be some boos. I think if this trade happened in December before, the past month of chaos, it probably just would have been cheers. But I think there's just enough of the fan base, but I don't know because a lot of the casual fan base are not as online as we are. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of them probably just saw that Jimmy requested a trade and he got traded. So I think it'll be a mixed bag if I were to bet, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more boos now, given how this went, than if this was like right after the trade demand he got sent out.
Hmm. Yeah,
Now,
I think it'll be mostly positive.
yeah, I think I'd be happy with that. You know, I don't want this to be a long lasting thing. I think me right now couldn't care less if he got his jersey retired just because of how much stress he's personally put me through. But I think me in 6 months will, look back and be like, dang, I hope he does. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how Andrew Wiggins is feeling, but I do think it has a lot to do with Pat Riley and how he's feeling and what he wants to do because I mean he's shown respect to guys that they've had falling outs with, but I don't know if it's gotten to this extent. But at the same time, a lot of the legends that leave here leave on bad terms, and so
Yep.
we usually come back around after time has healed those wounds. But that's the nature of an organization that is not going to pay you when you get old, and so you'll get paid while you're here. You'll get treated like a king while you're here, but once you hit 35, 36, get ready to pack your bags and find some other contracts because it's not coming from the Miami Heat.
That's exactly right. Well, before we move on to kind of what the future will look like, what Wiggins fit might look like, do you have any thoughts on Golden State's side of this? Do you agree with them kind of doing this last run with Curry? Do you kind of question them being willing to give Jimmy this contract? If you have any thoughts on their angle, I wondered what you were thinking there.
Yeah, I think this team, this Golden State Warriors, they won a championship in 2022, but beyond that, they've really struggled with this two timeline situation. And I do see this trade as a commitment to finishing out Steph's timeline and not worrying so much about reloading for the future. They probably could have made some other moves to really go all in on, these next 3 years. We're just going to try to get Steph one more, see what happens. I think this contract for Jimmy does line up with that timeline, which, then he'll probably be looking for another contract after that. But right now, I think that makes the most sense. I don't know how much Jimmy helps with the Warriors' problems. I think they just removed a little bit of spacing and shooting, but they've got and they have a guy who like works well cutting, works well moving around off the ball, but isn't exactly like an off-ball guy that you would want for the Warriors system. And that is going to be the main question to answer when we're watching this new Warriors team is can Jimmy fit into Kerr's slash Steph's system? Like it's not exactly about the quality of player that fits into that system, but the type of player and their
Hmm.
ability to get it. Jimmy's a smart guy and an incredible basketball player, so I think he can figure it out. But it's not exactly a thing that's just like you show up one day and you just know how to do all this stuff that they do because it's just very complex. There's a lot of movement, and then he's going to have a large load on the defensive end as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. Jimmy to me is like pretty close to a basketball genius.
yeah,
So if anybody could pick it up quickly, it would be him. But you're right. That's a tough offense to just immediately be thrown into. And especially, I mean, Steph and Draymond have so much chemistry. They almost like read each other's minds. So kind of picking your spots within that will
yeah,
be interesting. If I had to guess, Jimmy, actually, I don't know. I could see him either coming out ultra aggressive to like show everybody, or like we've also seen him be very passive when he's kind of trying to fit in early. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm excited to watch Warriors games for sure. Like I'm excited to see how it looks. And I was talking to my dad. He's a Lakers fan. Must be nice. But he was asking me like, does that elevate them into like the top tier in the West? And we both were like, no, it probably doesn't. But yeah, I agree with you. This puts a good third player to go along with Draymond and Steph, and they can kind of ride it out into the sunset, and then the Warriors will have a bunch of cap space and can kind of retool from there. They kept Kuminga. I don't know if they're going to continue to keep Kuminga. They gave up their first this year. I don't think it'll be like incredibly valuable. So yeah, I mean, maybe in a perfect world they end up getting like I really don't know. Ingram, I
dude,
guess. There's just not
yeah.
that many people. Well, yeah, Durant would have been
Durant would have been
preferred.
nice, but yeah, with that, there weren't a lot of options. I don't think anybody wants Brandon Ingram. which is
Well,
sad for him.
apparently the Hawks and the Hawks and Raptors are in hot pursuit, which I'm not sure what that'll
Which is
amount to.
crazy because nobody
Yeah.
really has any idea what the hell the Raptors are even trying to do right now. So I guess
Yeah.
that does make sense. If you're going to be the team that nobody understands what your play is, and you might as well go get the guy that nobody else wants.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
but this Warriors team, I agree that I don't know that they're going to be, top end talent, or they definitely haven't transformed into world beaters. And when if we were try to consider this trade from like a grading standpoint, I don't know if either of these teams get more than like a B minus. Like
Hmm.
neither of these teams really walk away feeling amazing about this trade, but you do walk away with the relief that you tried to do something at the deadline to salvage this season. So I can respect that. I will be interested to see how it goes. But from a personality standpoint, how do you feel Jimmy fitting alongside Draymond and even Steph and Kerr to this point?
I really don't know. I mean, you and I both know paid Jimmy is the easiest Jimmy to work with. So I really think it'll be chill. But Draymond is the one guy that I'm like, Draymond, it's been established like he can kind of get away with anything there. Like they're gonna cover for him. He's gonna, you know, do whatever he does. Everyone knows who Draymond Green is. I'm not gonna get into all the things he's
Yeah.
done. But I'm worried about that. Like as a Jimmy fan, like transitioning back into just like hoping Jimmy's career goes well. I'm a little worried just because, yeah, I don't think Jimmy's gonna take well to Draymond like screaming at him, and I
Yeah.
think Draymond will feel empowered to scream at him.
He'll
So
want to scream at him almost immediately. I think he wants to establish that he's the screamer in this
yeah,
relationship, and I just don't know how that's going to go. And I
yeah,
also am not sure, for Jimmy, it's been a long time since he was what, second, third fiddle
yeah.
somewhere. And
I,
he's
I
always talked about, being okay with that from like on the court standpoint. But
mhm.
from a franchise and like, outside picture standpoint, I think he's always since he left Philly, at the very least, wanted to be the face of an organization and
Yeah,
really gravitated to. And now that we've learned a lot more about the ways that the Heat, really accommodated his requests and the quirky things he liked to do and the way he liked to spend his time, I don't know if Golden State, Steve Kerr, are going to have time to do that with him. And also, they already have a Steph Curry on their team. So I'll be
yeah,
curious to just see how those relationships build. Steve has worked with a lot of different talent, as a coach in the Olympics, he's managed a lot of different personalities even just on the Warriors. And so if anybody can figure it out, it'll definitely be him. But I do think it'll take some work, and so I'm curious to see how much success they have this season compared to next season.
yeah. They have a lot of good basketball players on that team that I don't think fit together super well.
Mm.
Like Jimmy and Draymond, I think you'd kind of want them doing some similar things on offense, ball in their hand, handoffs, read and react stuff, but then like there's not a lot of shooting. But again, Jimmy's such a good player. He's so
Yeah.
smart. Like it'll make them better, I think. But I get Warriors fans that are like, man, Wiggins is younger, he's cheaper, he could grow with the future of the organization. So I get that they definitely probably have some reservations, but hey, not our problem because
Not our
Andrew
problem at
Wiggins
all.
is on our team now. And I'm pretty excited. So to transition to that, Andrew Wiggins, like last year was rough, obviously, but he had a lot going on. This year is looking pretty good by all accounts. I haven't watched a ton of Warriors games, but listening to different national podcasts, people have talked about him pretty positively. He's shooting 38% from three, still a high level defender. And I think he fits really seamlessly with this team. That was a
Oh
big
yeah.
part of the trade packages that I preferred was the ones that didn't really disrupt what's going on right now. To me, the four most important people on the roster are Tyler, Bam, Ware, and Nico. And I think
Mhm.
you could play Wiggins with those four, which could be super fun. But most importantly, he doesn't impede any of those guys from growing and developing. And so I'm super excited for his fit. So first question, what do you think the starting lineup will be now? And kind of how do you envision these guys working together?
I think that I think that you start Andrew Wiggins for sure, just because one, he's just a great talent, and two, you want him to get the ball rolling and allow him to catch up as fast as possible. And you can only do that through real game minutes. And so I think we saw some different lineups out there. I know you posted one in our show sheet, but for me personally, I think we just need to stick to starting our best talent and then work on different rotations from there. So I'd start Tyler, I'd start Duncan, and then I'd have Andrew Bam and then Kalel right after them in our front court. I just think that makes the most sense. I think Andrew Wiggins fits in that lineup super well from a shooting and defensive standpoint. And I think he does between him and Haywood Highsmith. I just think he does everything that Haywood Highsmith does, but maybe a little bit better, or maybe with a little bit more natural talent there. So that's the lineup I'm going with. I'm not Actually, I am. I don't want to see Duncan coming off the bench anymore. We've seen how much he struggles in that situation, and we've seen how much better the team is when he starts. So that's kind of where I'm hesitant, but I definitely don't really see any value in bringing Wiggins off the bench, if not maybe for like the first game or two. But did you have any thoughts otherwise, or you really adamant about bringing Haywood Highsmith to start?
No, I think Wiggins is like a perfect Haywood upgrade, and I think he helps Haywood slot really naturally into a perfect role, which is he's coming off the bench guarding the best offensive player that's the other team's six man or whatever it may be, or the lead
Hmm.
initiator that stays in with bench groups. And the other nice thing is Wiggins is, and I know people listening to this are like, they're talking about Andrew Wiggins like he's Kawhi Leonard, but he's just a solid upgrade over what we've had. But he's very versatile because of his size and his defensive abilities. So I
Hmm.
think there will be nights where you'll see Tyler, Duncan, Wiggins, Ware, Bam. I guess that'll be the starting lineup. That would be my guess. But I think you could see closing lineups where it's like Bam, Nico, Wiggins. You could go like Haywood, Tyler if you're going more defense. You could go
Hmm.
Duncan, Tyler for shooting. But yeah, he can just fit with a lot of different groups. If you're playing a team like Boston, with the Jays, you could play a lot of Haywood and Wiggins together. So you have two
Yeah.
strong defenders out there. And then, of course, with a double big lineup, you now have Bam, who's suddenly it's like we have an extra elite perimeter defender out there because you could put
Hmm.
Bam on any elite forward. So he brings a lot of versatility. And Kyle Anderson, if he stays, he's a good defender. He can't shoot very much, but he's a high IQ player, can make good reads. So I could see him working well with like a bench group with Ware and Nico or something.
Yeah.
Side note, we're not talking about the actual team too much tonight, but Nico, another great game versus
Dude,
Philly tonight.
he's
Looking very
rocking
good.
now.
He
Terry
was,
Rozier still,
yeah,
still piecing them together. I don't know if we'll really get into the game, but
yeah.
some sick stuff we saw from a lot of
It
people.
was it was a fun game, and we're finding out different things. We're recording right after the game, but it sounds like the team didn't totally know at halftime. Spo, like I think a reporter asked Bam, and Bam was like, "Yeah, Spo didn't address it because he thought we all knew." Like, which I thought was funny. So Spo's just like screaming about Tyrese Maxey, and everybody else is like looking at their phone, like, "Hey man, Jimmy's not on
So I
the
was like, are
team
we
anymore."
gonna talk about this at all? Of course, Spo would not. He's like, we have to win this game right now, and
Yeah.
shout out to the team for doing so.
Hmm.
But that does remind me, a couple guys kind of struggled tonight, but overall, what I love about this is that Andrew Wiggins doesn't only elevate to a certain extent our starting lineup. I do think he unlocks a lot of potential from our bench, as a defensive anchor, as a wing. We can switch a lot more with our bench lineup and our starting lineup. We can go very defensive heavy, but also, when he's playing with guys like Terry or just playing alongside just single big lineups, like we don't give up a lot, and then we can get to a all switching lineup if we need to. There's circumstances where we might take Tyler off the floor entirely and just have Haywood and Nico there with Wiggins, Bam, and Kalel, and just let the offense run through Bam. And the cool thing is that we don't really sacrifice. I mean, we're taking the 40% 3-point shooter off the floor, but replacing him with someone who's shooting 37%.
Hmm.
We still
And
have
it'll take
decent shooting out
more.
there. Yeah. And so, like, there's so many options with Wiggins that are available to us that we didn't have when we didn't have anybody there. Obviously, much better when Jimmy was there as
Yeah.
an active participant. But in the absence of that, this is a huge upgrade and really allows our roster to make a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's a good way. I think most Heat fans will think of it that way, and that's one of the nice benefits of that ugly divorce that led to all those suspensions. Is we basically just been missing $50 million of roster allocation, so now we suddenly have like a good small forward and a good backup power forward, and it's like it'll feel like we just made some strong acquisitions, even though we're technically losing probably the third best player in franchise history.
Yeah.
But
What that being said, of all the things we gain in this, I did want to note that we are going to be losing minutes from several guys moving forward. And I
and
wanted to ask
tell the
you
people why that is, Lino.
because some of our guys are not very good right now.
No, it's worse than that. The real reason I'm upset about this is because some of our guys are going to be losing minutes to PJ Tucker.
I don't want to admit that just yet. I'm going to give Spo the benefit of the doubt that he's not going to play the guy that hasn't played basketball in 13 months.
When I saw that we were keeping PJ Tucker and moving off Schroeder, I was like, oh no.
Yeah,
Like tonight against Philly, Bam and Kalel pick up 2 quick fouls each, and he puts in Kevin Love. That's not going to be Kevin Love next week.
it's
That's
not
going to
going to
be
be
number
Kevin Love.
17. And
PJ
I
Tucker.
still have his jersey for the record. I'm going to break it out of the
Man.
closet. But yeah, it is crazy that PJ's back. Hopefully Spo, just has him as like a good vet to have
Especially
around.
if we
He's
keep Kyle, I feel like, yeah, if Kyle has to stay and we don't end up trading him, like I feel like he eats up a lot of those minutes, which isn't the worst thing ever. But if
yeah,
PJ
he's
touches the floor, that's going to be quite devastating.
if they end up keeping Wiggins and Kyle Anderson, like suddenly pretty good depth. Like, that's 9 or 10 guys you feel good about. I will say again, we're kind of flowing back and forth between what the roster could be and what it has been. Pella Larson, another nice game tonight. And so those are
Yes.
the guys where like Jaime, he and
Jaime's
Haywood.
not seeing the floor for a long time, brother.
Well, but he's been playing better. But like Spo's going to have some decisions to make in
Hmm.
those kind of situations. I think Jaime, Haywood, and Pella will kind of be a rotating cast, and Alec Burks, if you want to throw him in there, of like DMPs, 8 minutes.
Yeah.
It'll be a mix. So we'll have to see how that develops. But I love that. Like I said earlier, the four most important guys: Tyler, Bam, Nico, and Ware shouldn't be affected by this. All of their
Mhm.
minutes should remain the same. And now they have a really strong small forward to, develop with.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Pele Jaime and Haywood end up splitting like the same 15 minutes every game.
Yeah.
It's we're running into a problem of having a ton of wings again, which we started the season feeling like we had that problem, and then it
Mm-hmm.
almost felt like, oh, all of our wings are bad again somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've got a lot of talent to work with. I am sad about it because Pele's development was something I was highly invested in if the season was going to go to shit anyways. And same with Jaime Jaquez Jr. As a player that's been struggling a bit and starting to put it together, it does become challenging to do so when you don't have the consistent minutes, or maybe even as long of a leash when those minutes can be replaced by a guy who might be playing a little bit more consistently moving forward. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what happens with them. Hopefully, we'll still get to get a good look at them, and luckily we don't have to worry about Kevin Love having to take his hoodie off in the final hour
Right.
of
Yeah,
the important
exactly.
game.
I think, like we were saying, I think it'll probably be Tyler, Duncan, Wiggins, Bam, Kalel, and then I feel like Terry's going to keep playing. Duncan will definitely keep playing. Jovic has to keep playing.
Yeah.
So you're already at 8. Usually Spo only plays 9. So then you're talking, is Jaime getting that ninth spot? Is Kyle Anderson after he gets acclimated? And then Pella, Alec Burks, it'll be a tough competition, but also the Heat having one of the healthiest teams in the NBA this season, not including
Mhm.
suspensions, obviously. So,
Yeah.
we have depth now to rely on in those situations. A couple more things I wanted to hit on. We'll close with our favorite memories of Jimmy because I do want to end on a positive note regarding him. But before we get to that, Phoenix. What happened?
Yeah. Dude,
So they
nobody could be more upset than Phoenix fans right now.
what a nightmare.
Worst case
So,
scenario.
oh, dude. So let's break it down. It starts with this like head over heels pursuit of Jimmy Butler. And they basically think using Jimmy and just kind of the pressure of NBA media, they can force the Heat into accepting some version of a Beal trade, right? They're pursuing all these different avenues, 5, 6 team deals, try and get them to take Beal. They even, without a deal in place, trade an unprotected 2031 first round pick, split it into 3 picks from Utah, none of which are probably going to be out like better than 20th. So they turn a good first into 3 bad first with no deal in place. Then, like a week before the trade deadline, they realize, oh, no one's going to take Beal. Then everybody starts calling about Durant. They're playing so poorly. They field some of those calls. Sounds like had real momentum to send Durant to the Warriors before Durant was like, I don't want to go back there. So now your superstar knows you were shopping him. He's only got a year left on his contract. Your other guy, Bradley Beal, basically forced you to keep him there when you didn't want to. So he knows you want him out of town. And then the actual guy that matters, Devin Booker, is probably sitting there like, so you guys don't have that first anymore. You don't have any talent coming in. We're like a game over 500 or something. I mean, what are your
You
thoughts on Phoenix?
you really can't get any worse than that, and I was astonished to see that they didn't have some kind of like, and there's still 16 hours, 17 hours or something like that left till the trade deadline. They may pull off something, but a lot of the reporting seems to lead to that nothing's happening in Phoenix besides them destroying their own pick for what seems to be no reason at all. And that can be very devastating because you've managed to upset all three of your most paid players. I mean, Devin Booker's not going to be happy about how this went. Kevin Durant is clearly not going to enjoy being shopped like that as the caliber of player he is, even though, anybody can get traded these days, given what we saw in Dallas just earlier this week. And then Beal, you just tried to practically begged him to leave town and he didn't budge. And so now you're stuck with that as well. Like the vibes couldn't be more off in Phoenix. And this is a team that used to be talented and young with depth and flexibility and a really bright future. Now it's just this weird conglomeration of superstars that don't necessarily play well together and don't really fit and don't have a real long term timeline or window to win a championship. And now they have less and less valuable assets. So, not great is how
Mm-mm.
I would respond to that.
But hey, they're gonna get a bunch of great stuff from Houston when they send them
Mhm.
Devin Booker. So
It's true.
don't worry, Suns fans. There's hope on the way. It's just gonna cost everything you've ever cared about. But to close on what is honestly one of the craziest chapters in Miami Heat history, I did kind of just want to talk about Jimmy, what he's meant to the franchise, and kind of just some of our favorite moments. Just to kind of set the table, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, teams kind of lost in the woods. They're missing the playoffs. They're barely making the playoffs. 11 and 30, 30 and 11. There's not a lot of hope to hold on to. Justice Winslow isn't working out. Bam is just starting to emerge, and they're able to get Jimmy for it's a sign and trade, didn't cost very much. Josh Richardson at a first. The first year takes him to the NBA Finals. Everyone listening knows all the success he had. Lino, as a fan, what did he mean to you as far as what he did for the organization, and how do you think you'll remember his time here?
You know, he really brought a level of excitement back and a level of excellence back to this team that felt so far gone after, we really cut our teeth on those seasons right before he was here, being a 500 team. And I think that was tough to go through after, having the big three, things fall out with D Wade, Chris Bosh gets unhealthy, and we're just kind of stuck and with not a lot of direction. We whiff on a couple draft picks, and yeah, it was just unfortunate. And just the fact that Jimmy wanted to play for us, and we had a superstar guy that wanted to play for us and was on the way, and he really delivered on that immediately with how competitive we were off the bat and just the way he elevated a roster that I don't think many other players, even other superstars, could elevate to the level that he did. And we really ran the East for these past 4 or 5 years, whether we were successful or we were defeated. The East ran through Miami and the East ran through Jimmy Butler. And so that was just a really exciting thing to be a part of. Me personally, I just loved everything that Jimmy represented from like a work ethic standpoint, as well as his side passions always seem to align with me. Anybody who knows me knows I love coffee. I'm a big coffee guy. I worked in the coffee industry for a very long time, and let that segue into one of my favorite memories when Jimmy started the Big Face brand. He opened up the coffee shop in the bubble, and then started this coffee brand. I was working in coffee at the same time, and there's this national conference, especially Coffee Association conference. That a lot of the industry goes to. And so I went there and actually got to meet Jimmy Butler and take a picture with them. And we actually served our coffees back to back at the same booth. So I was wrapping up on my demo, and he was coming in with all of his coffees and his whole team and stuff like that. And so that was a really fun memory because I just got to share with him, how excited we were to have him on the team and everything he's done for us so far. And, that's something that felt very, very exciting. And I'll look back on that picture and remember how excited I was that, he was a part of this. I wish, he would have been here another 4 years at least through the rest of his career. And I'd be open to having him back at the end of it all. But he definitely, we didn't get a championship through all this, but I feel like he definitely delivered everything that he had to give to us over these past 5 years. So definitely thankful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I mean, I could go on for hours about all the exciting times. I remember him going nose to nose with Grant Williams in game 3 versus Boston, us winning, going up 3-0. And I was like, wow, we're going to the finals again. And moments like that, the timeout gesture to Al Horford was awesome. But for
Mhm.
me, I think what'll always be most near and dear to my heart is that bubble run.
Yeah.
For anyone that knows me, then my wife and I watch almost every Heat game with my Mima, my grandma. And at the time of the bubble in 2020, I was actually living with my grandparents. It was very scary. It was a pandemic. I was afraid to, go outside. I didn't want to get sick. I didn't want to get them sick. And that bubble was kind of the only thing we had as sports fans to, pay attention to and be passionate about. And, the Heat come back, they beat the Pacers, and it's like, oh, we might be able to make a run. And then that Milwaukee series, Jimmy goes crazy with clutch shots over George Hill and Chris Middleton. They're able to beat Boston, and then to go to the finals, to lose Bam and Goran, and see Jimmy not give up, to easily could have just been like, I'm exhausted, I want to go see my family, we have no shot, our second and third best player out. And to me, I always thought of Jimmy as the sheer force of will superstar. He could will himself to a level that other people just can't. And to see him go one-on-one with LeBron, to have that famous quote where he told him, "You're in trouble," and I think it was game 5 or 6, and 40-point triple doubles in the finals. That was really like that moment where I was like, man, this is like that magic Dwayne gave you. It's
Mhm.
like, this is only, LeBron was awesome, but he felt more like a mercenary. I was like, this is our guy, outnumbered, outmanned, and he's just putting it all on the line. The famous picture of him, hunched over on the scorer's
Yeah.
table. It's just, it was amazing stuff. That's the stuff I'll remember. This messy divorce, it was not fun to go through, but that was, 2 months. This is 5 years of this guy doing everything he could to elevate this organization, his team. And, it'll always be fond feelings from me towards Jimmy, and appreciate everything he did for us.
Yeah, shout out to Jimmy Butler, man, and shout out to the Miami Heat through it all. We're gonna stick with this team, and this won't be the last superstar, but this will definitely be one we'll remember. It's crazy because we're going into our 30s this year, and we it's felt like kind of being a kid up to this point as a fan, and these guys are just going to be kind of cemented in our minds as that. But I'm thinking about being your dad's age and being a fan and like just the superstar guys that came across and the few people they, talk about, when they're 60. Tell the kid like
Yeah.
you weren't there for Jimmy Butler. You don't know how good Jimmy Butler was and
Yep.
what he did for this organization. So yeah, looking forward to having fond memories about Jimmy moving forward and wishing him the best. Really want to see him win a ring before it's all said and done, whether that be with the
Hmm.
Warriors or not. I know that's probably conflicting for you to see the Warriors and Steph Curry win another ring, but with
Listen,
Jimmy,
Jimmy's the only guy where I'd be okay if Draymond has to get another ring, let it be with Jimmy. So yeah, thank you all for tuning in. This has been a crazy year to start a Heat podcast, but it's been a ton of fun. Future episodes we'll be talking about how Andrew Wiggins looks. Did we end up keeping Kyle Anderson? What's the future of the Heat look like now that they have these extra picks and flexibility? But thank you for tuning in with us and going along on this crazy roller coaster that is Heat fandom with us. So for myself, Micah, my good friend Lino, thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you very soon.